Okay, so we're going to start talking a little bit about the Neo-Freudians. Now, these are the psychologists who came after Freud and had some ideas of their own, but are considered what we refer to as Neo-Freudians simply because they have a lot of the psychoanalytic theories in some of what they believe. But what we'll find is that there are some key differences between the Neo-Freudians and Freud. So we have Carl Jung, Karen Horney, and Alfred Adler. Carl Jung was big on what we refer to as the collective consciousness, or the collective unconscious, excuse me, which I'll go into in just a minute. Karen Horney was focused more on security, and she had sort of an opposite of penis envy, which is kind of interesting. And Alfred Adler was into what we refer to as individual psychology. So I'm going to very briefly go over these different psychologists and some of their ideas. Now, one thing that's really, really important is that they did agree with Freud in stressing the importance of the unconscious, and they were also very big proponents of early childhood experiences. But they did develop their own personality theories and disagreed with Freud on three really major points. So one was that behavior was primarily motivated by sexual urges. They admitted that sexual urges was involved in this, but that behavior was not primarily motivated by these urges. They also believed that personality was that they disagreed with Freud that personality is fundamentally determined by early childhood experiences. They did note that early childhood experiences were important, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're damned if you had a terrible childhood. Okay. So they really, emphasized that early childhood experiences were important for personality development, but not as fundamentally important as what Freud claimed. They also believed and disagreed with Freud in his very general pessimistic view of human nature and society. Freud is very well known for saying man is wolf to man. And so in essence, what that meant was that, people are inherently evil and bad and out for themselves, and that there's really not a lot of good in human existence. And so that was really Freud's take. I mean, he was really big on that. So Jung, Horney, and Adler, all the Neo-Freudians were like, well, we're not as pessimistic as Freud is about human nature. So just kind of going through very briefly, Carl Jung, if anybody played or sees the movie, and it went completely out of my head now, there is a movie out that is actually based off of Carl Jung's theories, and of course I absolutely cannot think of the name of the movie, and it's going to drive me absolutely crazy, and I'll just continue on. Hopefully it'll come to me. But in essence, Carl Jung's ideas were actually pretty interesting. Not everyone agreed with these, and he did vary quite significantly from Freud, which upset Freud significantly because he actually thought that Carl Jung was going to be his prodigy, and ended up, ironically, being Freud's daughter was Freud's prodigy. So Carl Jung believed in that people were motivated by a psychic energy, and in essence that everyone was sort of connected by this unconsciousness, and so this explains why we all sort of dream the same thing, why we all have the same sort of topics that occur in our lives over and over and over again. And so in every culture we have stories of the hero, the father, the nurturing mother, the witch, the wise old man, innocent child, death, rebirth, kind of like how we see in popular culture, for example, here, Wizard of Oz. And so in essence, what we find is that, Carl Jung believed that we're all connected by this unconsciousness. We have a string of consciousness that we're actually able to connect with as human beings. And he believed that, that each culture had this connection, and each person had this connection with one another. And so when we look at some of his ideas, he was the first one to describe an introvert and extrovert, but he describes them in this essence of how they direct their energy. So he believed that an introvert directed their energy inward and an extrovert generated their energy outward. And so he was one of the first to actually describe what these were. And so these are kind of what we refer to in these terms today as an introvert and extrovert. Now, Karen Horney was very big on culture and social factors in personality development. She was very interested in anxiety and how that related to how secure we felt, as well as a social relationship. And so her sort of her argument against Freud's penis envy is something where she referred to actually as womb envy. So she believed that men suffered from womb envy, which is an envy of women's capacity to bear children. She believed that what women envied in men was not their penis, but actually their social status. And so she believed that men actually have to compensate for womb envy, and the fact that they only have a very minor role in reproduction by striving to make creative achievements in their work, as well as being very successful in their life. And so if I believe that if Karen Horney was sort of coming out before Freud, I think she would have been quite influential with her ideas. And so Freud self-admittedly did not understand a woman's sex life very well. And so she did a really good job of filling in a lot of those blanks and saying, hey, this is kind of how, we think that people operate. And she had some very interesting ideas that were conflicting with Freud. Alfred Adler was one of the first to describe this idea of a superiority complex and inferiority complex. And so he believed that, as very young children, we experience this just immense feeling of inferiority at all aspects of our life. We can't even feed ourselves. We can't do anything for us. And so we experience this idea, this inferiority, and we're always striving as adults to try to fix this. And so when he described the inferiority and superiority complexes as over and under compensation. So he believed that if we overcompensate with these feelings that we had as a child, and a person ends up exaggerating their own achievements and their own importance, they'll experience what's referred to as a superiority complex. If they undercompensate for those particular feelings of inferiority as children, they can actually develop an inferiority complex, which is basically a sense of inadequacy and weakness and helplessness, that they feel like they really are not amounting to much in their life. He also was very important for just talking about and acknowledging these cultural influences and social relationships in development of personality. And this is something that we really didn't see in a lot of Neo-Freudian. So he kind of brought that to the table. Now, when we look at the Neo-Freudians and psychoanalytic perspective, we're looking at, in a lot of cases, stronger limitations than we do see in strengths. So some of the strengths is, it focuses on the unconsciousness in life, unconscious nature of mental life. And so the good thing here is, we see that this is something that most of the other perspectives really don't touch on. We also see, early experiences, how that influences interpersonal relationships and his psychological adjustment as adults. And we see that when we look at regulating impulses and emotions and thoughts, we see that there are differences here towards how we adapt and what is considered socially acceptable. And so, one of the strengths is to be able to explain why some people are able to regulate impulses, emotions, and thoughts better than others. And so some of these, not achieving these milestones during the psychosexual stages could be explanation for that. Another some major issues that this perspective has is it's very inadequate in terms of adequate evidence. We have very small and skewed samples. These problems with testability include things like having very vague and ambiguous concepts. It's pretty much impossible to disprove because when you're talking about the unconscious, there's no real way to actually give us solid evidence on what that is. And it does a better job of explaining past behavior than predicting future behavior. Can it kind of explain why somebody did the thing that they did, but not really, in essence, give us much information about what they're going to do tomorrow. It was also extremely sexist. So, penis envy, according to Freud, produces feelings of shame and inferiority. And so because of that, he believed that women were more vain and masochistic and jealous compared to men. And this is a really dangerous conclusion because now we're talking about, having women lower than men. And also he believed that women were more influenced by emotion and in essence have a lower ethical and moral sense compared to men, which again puts women on a lower step stool when it compares to men. Freud used male psychology as a prototype and believed that women were basically viewed as Freud viewed women as a deviation from the norm of masculinity. And again, so many of these sort of sexist thoughts can really influence how a person is going to view women, and this could put women at a lower ranking than men, and so this can be very dangerous in the scope of looking at those differences. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and end this video, and then I'm going to go ahead and start with the humanistic perspective. I'm going to cover a little bit about some of their perspective on personality.